Right, going back, Peter, I did read in your biography that you were in inverted commas, normal job
Yeah.
before you decided to take the plunge into this. What sort of background to prepare you for professional gambling did you have?
I'd always been interested in statistics and stuff, but I really had an unconventional path in my last job to arrive where I am, because going way back, I was interested in home computing, but I never made a real career out of that. But I did end up on the commercial side. So I ended up, the very last job that I had, I gradually worked my way up the career ladder like a good boy, to more and more senior positions, till I ended up with quite a senior position in a company that used to supply consumer electronics right across Europe. So I used to run around doing factory tours, working out production schedules, doing all of these things, speaking to retailers, all of that stuff. And after a long period of time of doing that, and I used to get paid pretty well to do it, I just realised that actually my heart wasn't in it any longer, and I really wanted to do my own thing. Never really thought that gambling would be it, if I'm honest. I thought it would be something in financial markets or something like that. But yeah, I found myself living the same year every year. I had a young family, had some toddlers that had just been born. And yeah, in my early 30s, I just decided that actually if I was going to do anything, I needed to do it now. And it was around that time that exchanges were taking off. So I think I was a bit fortunate that happened at that particular moment in time, but it's something that I've never regretted. And I'm glad that I did do it. So yeah, an unconventional transition into this side of things, but it's something that I've absolutely enjoyed and loved ever since.
I gather that when you broached this subject with your father, he was less than enamoured with the idea.
Yeah, I won't repeat what he said, but you can imagine, young family. My eldest was 3 and had twins, had just been born. Yeah, all my relatives thought it was classic midlife crisis material. It was a case of them thinking that I totally lost it, and that maybe just let him do it for a couple of years and then it'll be done and he'll be back to a normal job. But that never happened. But yeah, absolutely every single person I spoke to, apart from 2 people, put me off. One was my wife, who just said, well, I trust you, you've always seemed to have done okay, so if you think it's the right thing, then do it. And the other was a mentor of mine, and I asked him what I should do, and he said, you'll only ever regret the things you never did. So it was him that actually made me decide that I was going to quit my job and go off and do this full time, or give it a proper go, because I just thought if I do it and it fails, then at least I gave it a go.
We always like to hear about mentors. Can you just go back and tell us a bit, what did you learn off of yours?
He actually, it's funny because I try and transplant this to other people now, because the biggest thing that he taught me was that there are sort of no limits to whatever you want to do. And he's actually gone off to do incredible things. And I took my inspiration from him in terms of losing that fear of making a mistake. And when he said to me, you'll only regret the things you never did, that's what he was more or less saying, was go out there, do things, and if you fail, then learn from it. Because you'll always live to fight another day. Nobody died. It's okay, as long as you look at things in a reasonable perspective. It's fine to do those things. So I have to give him endless appreciation for being able to push me on that path. But he also, he sort of nurtured, and I could go to him for advice and he would give me practical advice in terms of roughly what I was doing from there. But yeah, he was my inspiration. He was probably the only person ever that took me seriously about anything that I ever did. So I have to thank him endlessly for that. But when I speak to other people now, I'll make sure that people know that things aren't necessarily guaranteed, but nonetheless, maybe you should give it a go. Maybe you are suited to something. And that could be anything in life. If you want to be a bungee jumper, parachutist, a teacher, or whatever, I think you should follow your dreams and give it a go, because then at least you'll feel fulfilled, even if you can't make it work for you.
So you jumped in with both feet. Now, unless you were extremely lucky, you must have had periods where you thought, what the hell have I done? How did you cope with them?
I think immediately, I remember really well handing in my resignation, because we had a meeting not far from here, curiously, and it was to present our business plans for the following year. And I just put up on my presentation, I thought about it for a whole week, I just put up on my presentation, find a replacement for Peter. So up went the slide, everybody laughed. And then they suddenly began to realise that I was actually serious. And so I think immediately after, I'd done that was probably the period where I realised there was no turning back, and I had the biggest amount of self-doubt. So they put me on gardening leave, and I just went off and played golf and visited friends. And the longer I left it, the more I realised I'd actually probably done the right thing. But when you take that plunge, it's actually very hard. And so I wrote for a magazine for 3 years when I first started doing this, because I just thought that's a fallback position. If things don't work out, then I've actually got the ability to be able to fall back on that sort of income. But thankfully I never needed it. But that first year, it was very tough because you don't know what's in front of you. From that point onwards, it becomes a little bit easier to cope.
So when was that first year?
I started on Betfair on the 18th of June 2000, and I quit my job in 2003.
Okay, so fast forward into now, what would be your daily routine before you start gambling? How much preparation goes in?
If you look at the day, you almost need to look at it from the night before. So when I finished my session this afternoon, I'll analyse what I've done. So every single thing that I've done in the market today, I'll look at and see if I could have done better, or if I missed something. I did a really fantastic job yesterday on one particular race and an absolutely terrible one on another one. So yesterday evening I was looking at how I could have done better and if there were things that I could have done better. The following day starts the night before, effectively. But the first thing I do in the morning is actually anything other than looking at spreadsheets or trading or gambling. I'll have a quick glance at the markets, but then I'll go out and do something different. So I'll go out and ride a mountain bike, go for a walk, anything other than that. And then I'll turn up at my desk at about sort of 11:30, and that's when I start seriously looking at the markets and seeing what's in front of me and trying to understand what the shape of the day is going to be and what I need to do and when.
Okay, so I understand that you've got models for trying to anticipate how markets are going to move, which is your main business, trading in and out. The people that you're trading in and out against, most of them are going to be not professional at all. In fact, a lot of them might be, real amateurs just having a stab. So how difficult is it to factor in what some people on the other end might do that doesn't make sense?
Well, if you look at the markets, I haven't looked at them today actually. If I look at my screen now, I can make a sort of a rough assessment on it. But a market that's taking place in 2 or 3 hours' time, I'll know how much it's likely to trade, how much will be bet on each individual runner, and how that's likely to influence the outcome of that market before the race has started. Now, I can make assessments and judgments on that, and they're repeating predictable patterns, but only when the race actually starts up will I be able to make a firm judgment on what's likely to happen. So I can estimate today how much the markets are going to turn over and what they'll roughly do, but until I can see it on my screen and I can see the horses, I can't make a very firm judgment on that. So I think that when you look at the market, most of the activity, particularly because we're talking about horse racing here, is focused on that period when the horses come out of the stables and into the pre-parade ring and start getting saddled up. That's when the activity in the market really begins to bubble along. So I can estimate loads of things and how the market's likely to behave, but it's only when that begins to happen can I really see how people are likely to bet.
So do you take notice of what people say on the television, for example? If a commentator says this one's sweating up badly, is there a marked movement in the market just for something like that?
There generally is. If you look at the behaviour of horses, it was a revelation to me because when I first looked at the racing industry, I didn't know much about it. I think this is where the racing industry could improve itself. So when I first went to the races, because I was interested in learning about racing, it felt very alien to me. I didn't feel particularly welcome. I didn't know what any of the... I thought a maiden was a Disney princess. I had no idea it was a horse that hadn't won a race. So when I looked at the race card, it just meant nothing to me. But increasingly over time, I had to approach the market completely cold because I knew nothing about racing, but I've learned huge amounts about racing now. And I've visited Santa Anita, Del Mar, been to Laytown, been to all the major race courses and gradually working my way around them. But part of that has been fired up by my knowledge of racing itself and how the racing industry works and the effort that goes into individual looking after a racehorse and stuff. But learning and listening to what people are saying can be quite interesting. I think very often pundits summarise too much. They'll just go down the list of 16 runners and say something positive about all 16, which is totally unhelpful. But every now and again, people will say things that are very, very useful. And if a horse is misbehaving, or you know that it's misbehaved before, there was one, I think it was at Huntington, I'm trying to remember now, yesterday, where they were talking extensively about how it's always a quirky type and often refuses to start. And then immediately they tried to start the race, it just turned and never even got a run. So it's interesting to hear about what's going on, and I think that some of the racing channels do a great job of that, because you'll get good coverage of the horses in the parade ring, you'll get to see how they go to post, and all of those things influence how the market's going to trade.
So is there a particular type of event that happens that makes the market overreact?
Yeah, I think very often there was a brilliant example at Goodwood last year when Ryan Moore ran a few winners. And we came up to the next race, and it was a very competitive handicap. All horses were equally rated, but because Ryan Moore had won a few races beforehand, everybody just started piling on the next runner. And I looked at that and I just thought, well, this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And, you know, okay, maybe the ground suited the horse and the trainer, and maybe Moore was in good form on that particular day, but you don't generally see something come from 20 to 1 to 5 to 1 and think, well, I must back that. It's amazing how often that happens in the market. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, that the psychology of the market is interesting in itself. And I imagine at most major meetings where everybody's had a few drinks, that may have an influence on the market as well. So it's weird when you see things like that, because I'm looking at it quite cold, and very often I'll know the horse, but not in great depth. But I can see the market is heavily overbacking something, and therefore you know that it's just not going to be a great value bet.
Anybody old enough to remember Frankie Dettori's Magnificent Seven probably overreacts still.
Yeah. Well, that's the reminder. When you, I mean, that wouldn't have that been the most unbelievable market whatsoever. So I've spoken to some bookies that were around in that period, and I mean, of course, all of them came in. So, you know, I think people always hope that that's going to happen again. I think it's called the illusion of control, the belief that somehow, because you want it to happen, it's going to happen. But I can tell you now, when you look at cold hard cash, it doesn't happen.